Pepsi versus Cola, Nintendo versus Sega, Josh Brown and an explosion at a colour factory when it comes to style. There are some rivalries that cut deep. Competition in an industry is a good thing. Well, healthy competition, that is. But time and time again, things have gotten a little less boardroom meeting and more schoolyard roughhousing thanks to a few snide jabs here and there. And one cannot think of a bigger rivalry in comics than that of Marvel versus DC. Both have their cinematic universes, both have their huge back catalogues of superheroes, and both, apparently, have had an axe to grind in the past. So let's look at some of the times when it turned downright ugly, and both sides resorted to dirty tactics just to get the leg up. I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 8 times the Marvel vs. DC rivalry turned ugly. Number 8. The Captain Marvel lawsuit. It's no secret that both DC and Marvel have a character on their books who goes by the name of Captain Marvel. Indeed, these superheroes are set to go head-to-head at the box office next year, with their cinematic debuts falling just weeks apart. How they came to share the same moniker, though, is a long story paved with lawsuits, which dates back to the days when DC was known as National Comics Publications. Back then, it was embroiled in a legal spat with a third publisher, Fawcett Publications. The now-defunct Fawcett was the original home of Captain Marvel, the current DC version, and his comics were actually the best-selling superhero titles of the 1940s, outperforming even Superman. It was, however, the character's perceived physical resemblance to Superman which put the two publishers on a collision course. One of the longest and most drawn-out court battles in the history of the industry ensued, and when it came to a head, Fawcett was forced to cease publishing Captain Marvel comics from 1953 onwards. DC snapped up the rights to the superhero and his supporting casts and integrated them into its mainline superhero universe. But all of this didn't really happen until 1991, and what do you think Marvel was going to do? Just sit back and watch a character with their name become a DC mainstay? No way! So while this was going on, Marvel had made their own version and it had become quite popular. This forced DC to have to call their version by Shazam, and while DC's Captain Marvel is the original, the firm cannot claim to have originally created the character. Mental. Number 7. Stan Lee slams DC from his soapbox. One of the most exciting reasons to pick up some Marvel comics was to check out Stan Lee's thoughts in the aptly named Stan's Soapbox column. The Spider-Man co-creator used his soapbox to keep his fans in the loop about Marvel's upcoming plans and muse about happenings in the comics industry. And as you might expect, it wasn't free from a few cheeky swipes at DC as well. Lee's jibes were often playful and veiled, but there were some times that he overstepped the mark, including one occasion when he insinuated that Marvel comics are for intelligent people while their competitors cater for quite the opposite. He also accused rival publishers of trying to emulate his firm on more than one occasion. DC's response was to poke fun at Lee's copying claims by introducing a shape-shifting character called Chameleon Boy in Adventure Comics number 350, who cheekily transformed himself into a man-spider hybrid before winking wryly at the reader. This kicked off a chain reaction of back-and-forth satire, and soon afterwards, the two publishers were mercilessly lampooning each other. Marvel parodied Batman and Robin, while DC returned fire in tongue-in-cheek titles such as Fantastic Four's skit Inferior 5. It descended into the level of punmanship and crap jokes that even I was disgusted by. Number 6. Jack Kirby's brutal Stan Lee parody. One of the most shocking moments for the comic book industry came when Jack Kirby defected from Marvel to DC in 1970 after a huge series of spats with Stan Lee. Chief amongst Kirby's gripes was the amount of credit that Lee was given for the creation of iconic characters they had dreamed up together, including the Fantastic Four, the Incredible Hulk, and the X-Men. The illustrator took out his frustration on Marvel and Lee by brutally parodying them in a title that he was working on for DC, Mr. Miracle. In issue number 6, he depicted Marvel as a former slave plantation run by a money-hungry villain called Funky Flashman, who bore an uncanny resemblance to his former collaborator. Word has it that Lee was deeply hurt by Kirby's takedown, not so much by his portrayal as a manipulative bad guy, more the fact that the artist poked fun at his toupeed appearance, which is just weird in itself. It's also been said that Stan shaved off his beard so that he wouldn't resemble Funky Flashman. Wouldn't that just draw more attention to it? Number 5. Blaming each other for a collapsed crossover. By the mid-1970s, Marvel and DC were on better terms, and it was around then that the firms came together to answer a question that fans had long pondered. What would happen if the two publishers' most iconic heroes crossed paths with each other? Superman and Spider-Man shared the page on 2 occasions, and Batman briefly became frenemies with the Hulk, but plans for a crossover on a bigger scale were in the pipeline. In 1983, Marvel and DC were planning to release a joint Avengers Justice League comic book, and a creative team comprising artist George Perez and writers Jerry Conway and Roy Thomas were firmly in place. It was an exciting time to say the least. Yet, somewhere along the way, the plans came apart. Not only did the two publishers blame one another for the cancellation, they did so publicly on the pages of their own comics. Marvel editor-in-chief Jim Shooter put his side of the story across in Marvel Age number 19, telling readers that DC sent him a story outline for the crossover, which just wasn't good enough as it didn't make any sense. According to Shooter, DC repeatedly dragged its feet when he demanded a revised script and often neglected to return his calls. DC hit back, placing the blame squarely at Marvel's door, accusing Shooter of derailing the crossover by constantly stalling when it came to signing off on creative decisions. As a result, this and future pre-arranged crossovers were cancelled. Thankfully, things soon eased up on this front, and 2002's JLA/Avengers crossover is absolutely bloody brilliant. Number 4. David Ayer's Marvel outburst. Now these days, the battle lines between Marvel and DC have largely been erased, and the top brass in both camps are full of mutual respect for one another, but Suicide Squad director David Ayer apparently didn't receive that memo. During the bad guy-centric movie's New York City premiere, the filmmaker got carried away and bellowed "F Marvel," much to the amusement of the DC-loving crowd. Although this came across like a vicious attack on the rival studio, he then since retracted the remark and apologized, admitting that he was caught up in the moment. He wrote on Twitter afterwards, "Sorry about getting caught up in the moment and saying F Marvel. Someone said it. I echoed. Not cool. Respect for my brother filmmakers." It wasn't one of his proudest moments, and it was made even worse by the fact a fan recorded the whole thing and posted it onto online social media. But then again, spending that amount of time next to Jared Leto being a dick as the Joker was bound to have some effect, right? Number 3. Spying allegations. Marvel's 50-year battle with DC has been so compelling that somebody actually wrote a book about it. Author and journalist Reed Tucker's Slugfest takes a deep dive into the comic book rivalry and exposes a few closet skeletons along the way. According to Tucker, both publications have accused the other of spying at some point over the years, alleging that they planted moles in the hopes of uncovering secrets. In 1971, DC is said to have learned that one of its employees was leaking information to Marvel, and in response launched a spying operation of its own. Tucker went into detail about this during an interview with Newsweek. The head of DC launched an honest-to-God counter-espionage operation, codenamed Blockbuster, in which he created a fake memo about the company's plan to publish gigantic 500-page comics. He then left it in his outbox. Sure enough, the spy took the bait, and soon there was talk over at Marvel of doing 500-page comics. Number 2. The Wonder Man controversy. When their rivalry was at its most bitter, Marvel and DC found ways to undermine each other creatively. In 1964, for instance, the House of M introduced a character called Wonder Man, which obviously ticked off its competitor because, well, I mean, look at it. Although DC didn't go running to the court citing clear similarities to a certain Amazon warrior on its books, the publisher is said to have held crunch talks with Stan Lee and asked him to discontinue the offending superhero. Now, not wishing to rattle any more cages, Lee obliged and Wonder Man was killed off. Characters rarely stay dead in comics, but this one might have done if DC hadn't unveiled Power Girl just a few short years after Marvel introduced Power Man. The then Marvel editor is said to have been incensed that DC pulled the very same stunt that they'd reprimanded his firm for years earlier. In an act of payback, Lee then gave the green light for Wonder Man to be resurrected. And number 1, the Black Panther Rotten Tomatoes saga. It was a sad state of affairs when reports of a DC fan campaign to vote down and sabotage Black Panther's Rotten Tomatoes score emerged, and an even sadder one when the truth behind those reports came to light. Facebook moved quickly to shut down the anti-Panther pages, but not before it sent out a wave of outrage across the internet. DC fans just looked bad at this point, and suddenly all of the worst things about the brand's rivalry with Marvel were evoked. In truth, most actual DC fans fans were just as outraged as everyone else. It was just the few and the stupid whipping up people into a frenzy who, and I hate to say this, probably weren't really hardcore comic fans anyway. Although the hate campaign seemingly had nothing to do with DC or its supporters, 3,700 people declared their intention to participate in the sabotage, and another 1,800 were considering it. Taken at face value, those numbers did little to encourage unity between two fan bases who have a history of not seeing eye to eye. And there we go, those were 8 times that Marvel and DC just had a bit of a bitch fest. Let me know what you thought about it down in the comments section below, but before you go, maybe you'd like to check out something else we do over here on the Lovely Comics channel. I know I don't come over as much as I should. It's kind of like Ewan himself who runs this thing. He's my forgotten son. I pop over when I can, when I'm not busy or have to go to the shops or just, just fancy chilling out for 5 days just by myself. Anyway, as always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Go follow me at RetroJ with a 0 over on Twitter and chat all sorts of comic nonsense to me. And you have, as always, been absolutely lovely, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye!